That's awesome, and thank you, Shelley. Okay, guys, so we're going to jump into week 3 of this series. And to get us started, I'd love to ask you, if you have played the game Would You Rather? Anybody ever played that game? Yeah, a few of you? So for the uninitiated, essentially Would You Rather is a game where you're given 2 opposing scenarios, and you're asked to choose which situation you'd rather find yourself in. Now, I have 2 kids who are 7 and 5, so when you play this game with kids, the choices mostly end up being about superpowers. Like, do you want to fly or, like, be invisible? Or they're about really gross food choices. Like, do you want to eat an entire jar of mayonnaise, or would you rather drink a cup of hot sauce? Which is just ridiculous, because obviously the answer is hot sauce, right? Like, who would choose mayonnaise? But I think sometimes when we play this game as adults, it ends up being an unexpected opportunity for us. It lets us kind of get honest and notice what we value most in life. So we're going to give it a try together, okay? You guys game? We're just going to do a few of these. I'm going to read the question, and then I'm going to ask you to raise your hand for which one you would choose. The first one, would you rather go without television or junk food for the rest of your life? Who would be giving up television? Yeah, okay. Who would be giving up junk food for the rest of your life? Oh my goodness, that is a surprise choice for me. Okay, next one. Would you rather travel the world for free for an entire year or have $50,000 to spend however you please? Okay, who are the people who are hopping on a plane tomorrow? I am with you, yes. Who is going to take the cash and stay home? It's like a 50-50 split. I like that. Okay, this one, I think I might know the answer to this one, but would you rather your schedule look like this? Do we have a picture of the schedule, possibly? Schedule look like this, or like this? I'm just guessing here, but who would take the first one? Who are my crazy people who want to go for that second schedule? We have a few of you honest enough to admit that's exactly what your planner looks like. I think it's really interesting how playing this game can end up being really revelatory for us. Because I think it's a chance for us to examine whether what we say we want matches what our lives actually show. And then it gives us an opportunity to evaluate whether we want to change something, act accordingly. Because the truth is, if we want to live the kind of life that aligns with our deepest values, it usually involves trade-offs. I think we know this instinctively. But as we say in one of our 10 practices for becoming that we talk about around here, we have to actually choose what we want more. It's a conscious choice. And it reminds me of this guy that I met several Christmases ago who really could have benefited from a game of Would You Rather. That year, that Christmas, my mom made a plan. She wanted to surprise my dad with a super big, unexpected gift. She was going to get him a Polaris Ranger. He'd been wanting one of these for a while. And so she enlisted my husband and I to help find one. And we found a really good deal on Craigslist, but it was quite a ways away. So early one Saturday, we got up, drove to Illinois so that we could meet the owner in this really small window of time that he was available. And as we're loading up the Ranger, the guy mentioned that, he decided to sell it because they really didn't use it anymore in their family. He bought his kids each their own four-wheeler, so they pretty much never rode together anymore. And he was working a ton of overtime, gone most weekends anyway. And I remember this moment where he just kind of looked down and he sighed and he said, sometimes the kids are like, Dad, why are you never home? Why can't you come play with us right now? But I just had him take a good look around. And I asked him, do you like all these toys? Those new four-wheelers? The travel ball team? Me being gone is what makes that happen. And I remember just having a super strong emotional reaction in that moment. Because it was so clear that this man loved his family. And he was working so hard to try to provide a good life for them. And he knew that there was a trade-off to be made between the stuff that they owned and the time that they had available to spend together. But somehow he'd resigned himself to there only being one right choice. And he never actually considered that maybe he maybe even his kids, might have actually chosen the time over the stuff. This was a guy who was in need of a holy game of would you rather. And I've thought about that guy so many times over the last 10 years. I wondered if he ever took a chance to step back and evaluate whether the trade-offs he'd chosen actually reflected what he and his family wanted most. And every single time that moment comes to mind, I hear this little voice in my head that's like, what about you, Leslie? Because the truth is, I struggle with this stuff too. And I have a feeling it's resonating with a lot of you guys as well. Here's the good news that we're going to talk about today. Hurry sickness, it clutters our schedules, our homes, and our hearts. But when we trust our good and generous God to richly provide for our needs, we stop hustling to accumulate more in our own power. Jesus invites us to move away from hurry and into simplicity. Now, I think most of us know that we would rather have simplicity than hurry. If we're given a would you rather choice that's clear between a life of busyness and crowds and clutter or a life of peace and connection and simplicity, I think we all say we want the latter. The problem is that when we look at our lives, there is often a disconnect between what we say we want more and our daily habits. Like we know that we'd rather have a simpler schedule, but we still find ourselves constantly adding new activities and things to the calendar. We know we'd rather have homes and lives that are uncluttered by meaningless or distracting stuff, but we just keep buying more and more. You might say that we have an accumulating problem with accumulation. And I think it's a problem that's slowly sucking the life out of us. This is why we're wrestling with this concept of hurry sickness this month. So we're in week 3 of a 4-part series that's based on a book by John Mark Comer called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. I cannot recommend this book highly enough. I've read it like 2 or 3 times myself already. In the past 2 weeks, we reviewed Comer's definition of hurry sickness. He says, it's always striving, but never arriving. And that kind of frenzied way of life, it cuts off our connection to God, to one another, and even to our own souls. But Jesus invites us to a better way of life when he says, come to me, all you who are struggling hard and carrying heavy loads, and I will give you rest. Put on my yoke and learn from me. I'm gentle and humble, and you will find rest for yourselves. My yoke is easy to bear, and my burden is light. During this series, what we're doing is encouraging one another to adopt a set of practices that help us recover from hurry sickness and embrace this rest that Jesus is offering us. So Brian challenged us to practice stillness or silence the first week. And then last week, Jeremiah equipped us to embrace the idea of solitude and give that a try. And today we're going to talk about the practice of simplicity. Now, simplicity is a practice that sounds simple, at least, literally, but it's actually pretty complicated for most of us, isn't it? I think as humans, we are wired for more. In one way or another, we are all wired for more. Thomas Aquinas once put this just like so starkly when he said, what would it take to satisfy human desire? Everything. It would take everything. This is a complicated reality for human nature. But Jesus knew it. He understood it, and he addressed it directly in Luke 12, in a passage that we often refer to as the parable of the rich fool. So we're going to take a look at that. It starts when somebody randomly in the crowd says to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." And Jesus says to him, "Man, who appointed me as judge or referee between you and your brother?" And then Jesus said to them, "Watch out. Guard yourself against all kinds of greed. After all, one's life isn't determined by one's possessions, even when someone is very wealthy." Then he told them a parable. A certain rich man's land produced a bountiful crop. He said to himself, "What will I do? I have no place to store my harvest." Then he thought, "Here's what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. That's where I'll store all my grain and my goods. And I'll say to myself, you have stored up plenty of goods, enough to last for several years. Now take it easy. Eat, drink, enjoy yourself." But God said to him, "Fool, tonight you will die. Now who will get the things you have prepared for yourself? This is the way it will be for those who hoard things for themselves and aren't rich toward God." Now, I want to be clear about what this parable is and isn't saying. Jesus isn't saying there's anything inherently wrong with possessions or saving. Both of those things are good. And he never says in this passage that this man acquired his abundance through any sort of shady means. There wasn't theft or bribery here. He wasn't mistreating his workers. There was no criminal activity. This wasn't the parable of the evil rich guy. That's not what we're talking about here. It's called the parable of the rich fool. Jesus says the guy was foolish. Why? Because this is a guy who devoted his entire life focused on accumulating stuff for himself to the exclusion of connection with God and with other people. To put it bluntly, Jesus is saying here, selfish greed is foolishness. It's foolishness. And I think it's because Jesus knows the lies and the allure of greed. We see him in the very beginning of this passage issue this warning to the whole crowd. Watch out, be vigilant against all kinds of greed. I think it's because he knew what a seductive trap greed can be. Greed worms its way into our lives, doesn't it? Like it promises us that if we just have a little bit more and we work a little bit harder, then we'll get to rest. Then we'll feel peace. But greed only ever delivers us more hurry and more worry and more anxiety. Author Alan Fadling once said, "The drive to possess is an engine for hurry. It drives it." Guys, our desire for more, individually and as a society, ends up stealing the very things we hoped that more would actually give us. And in this way, hurry sickness clutters our hearts and our schedules and our homes. But when we trust our good and generous God to richly provide for our needs, we can stop hustling to accumulate more in our own power. Because Jesus' invitation is to move away from hurry and into simplicity. Ultimately, this is a hard issue we've all got to wrestle with, right? I mean, we all have these deeply rooted desires, and some of them are for really good things. They are. Jesus' parable here is inviting us to just get ruthlessly honest about those desires and then evaluate what's behind them. So I'm afraid when we start to dig deep into our drive to accumulate, what we end up finding is that a lot of us have been discipled by the gospel of materialism. We have this idealized version of success in our mind, the American dream, where we have the big house and the white picket fence, the good salary, 2.5 kids, and a hypoallergenic dog. And they're really cute though. But what so often happens is we end up checking those boxes, we acquire all those things on our little mental list, and then we wake up to realize it still wasn't enough. We still feel this longing for more. There's still an emptiness. So we go out and we work more hours and we spend more money, and we're all just trying to satisfy desires that in the end, only God can fulfill for us. But Jesus says there's a better way. And that way is the way that leads to freedom and rest and peace. He says, instead, desire first and foremost God's kingdom and God's righteousness. And then all these things will be given to you as well. Jesus is urging us to embrace the truth that we have a good and generous Father who created us, and he knows us inside and out. And that God is faithful, and he will richly provide what we need. He invites us to choose to take his yoke upon us and begin to learn from him this better way, a kingdom way of living our lives. If we seek first his kingdom, he promises we're going to find what we're truly looking for. We're going to find those deep desires, that emptiness that the things and the schedule couldn't fill, are met in the fullness of God's love and provision, because he knows what we need better than we know what we need. Paul describes this kingdom alternative really beautifully in his first letter to Timothy. And I want you to just listen to this, see what sticks out, see if it captures your imagination for a different way to live. Tell people who are rich at this time not to become egotistical, not to place their hope on their finances, which are uncertain. Instead, they need to hope in God, who richly provides everything for our enjoyment. Tell them to do good, to be rich in the good things they do, to be generous, and to share with others. When they do these things, they will save a treasure for themselves that's a good foundation for the future. That way, they can take hold of what is truly life. When we let go of our addiction to accumulation and we begin to embrace the way of Jesus as our way of life, it opens us up to what is truly life. A life where we can trust God to provide for us. Not at some marginal, just the minimum for survival kind of level. That's not our God. We can trust him to provide for us abundantly, lovingly. And from that abundance that we receive from him, we can follow in his example. We can be generous with our time and our resources and our presence in ways that allow all of us to experience more purpose and joy and connection. Hurry sickness is a thief. It steals and clutters our schedules, our homes, and our hearts. But when we trust our good and generous God to richly provide for our needs, we can stop hustling to accumulate more in our own power. The invitation of Jesus is to move away from hurry and into simplicity. Now, I was super excited when I got this assignment to teach, because simplicity is actually a core value for me. A few years ago, I went through the unique process that we do around here. If you don't know what that is, we'll be talking about it more at the end of the summer. We'll be doing another round starting in the fall. But the unique process, you identify your core values, and simplicity was the first one that emerged for me. And I've been on a bit of a minimalism journey for several years now. So the practice of simplicity is one that resonates really deeply with my soul. But even for me, somebody who's like thinking about this stuff and reading about this stuff all the time and totally geeks out on it, the drift toward accumulation or trying to secure my needs in my own power is really strong. And I still get pulled back into the current just like everybody else. My husband and I just had a conversation about this last night. And I think it got even harder as I became, like I went from being a single person to like a wife and a mother, and things got more complicated in my life. And what I found is that I have to regularly take time to pause and reflect on how am I responding to the good news, to Jesus' invitation to move away from hurry and into simplicity. This has to be a regular practice where I evaluate, would I rather? And so we're going to take a few minutes to actually practice that together right now, okay? So I want you to just close your eyes where you are, kind of get comfortable. Maybe take a deep breath. And as you do that, I'm going to ask you a series of questions. And I'm going to invite you to just quietly reflect on those questions. This time is between you and God. But I encourage you to take on a posture of what we call compassionate curiosity. So don't judge your thoughts or beat yourself up about anything that comes to mind. Just stay curious about what truth God may want you to hear, or what next steps he may be nudging you to take. Okay, here we go. First question. What lessons did you learn from your family growing up about money and possessions? What would your bank statement and calendar show that you value? Is it different from what you say is important to you? Do you see God as a generous father who loves to provide for his kids? Or are you secretly afraid you can't trust him to take care of you? Right now, does your life show that you value more stress, more clutter, more hurry? Or does it show that you want more joy, connection, purpose? What is one way that you notice Jesus may be inviting you to move away from hurry and towards simplicity? You guys can go ahead and open your eyes now. I want you to pay attention, kind of take note of whatever themes God brought to your mind during that time of reflection. And if you're here with your spouse or maybe a close friend that you can talk to these things about, after the gathering, I really want to encourage you to talk about what you each noticed as you went through that exercise. But before we go, I also have another challenge for you that I think is going to help us extend these practices beyond just what we do together in the gathering. We've been doing this each week of this series. We're calling it our weekly equipping lab. So the first week, if you've been here for the whole series, you know Brian challenged us to practice silence by setting aside 20 minutes to just sit and be aware of God's presence. And then last week, Jeremiah challenged us to find simple moments or set times in our day where we could practice solitude and use like a breath prayer as a practice to focus on. And this week, I'm going to challenge each of us to experiment with simplicity. And I'm going to give you 2 options of practices to choose from. One is a possessions purge, and the other is a purchase pause. So aside from being alliterative, these are pretty much exactly what they sound like, but we're going to flesh it out a little bit more. If one of the things you noticed during that exercise is that you've already done like a lot of accumulating, and maybe you're a little too emotionally attached to your stuff, a possessions purge may be the best choice for you. So between now and next Sunday, your challenge is to pick a room, a closet, or maybe a whole category of things and make 3 piles. You're going to do the things to keep, the things to throw away, and the things to donate, and then actually do it. We're going to actually purge those things. Trash the throwaway pile, take the donate pile to one of the many wonderful organizations we have in our area that accept used items. And if you need help finding one of those, you're not aware, we know of several. Reach out to us. We'll put you in touch with somebody. But my family actually got a little bit of a head start on the possessions purge already. Over the last month, we've been devoting some time to paring down closets and cabinets and toy boxes, things like that, to eliminate things that end up causing us a lot of maintenance stress that we don't use that much, and donate them to where hopefully they'll actually get used a little bit more. They can get new life in their new world with people who need them more than we do. So we're going to continue with that practice. But the other option is the purchase pause. So if what you're finding and noticing is that your heart, mind, and energy are being pulled toward acquiring new things right now, this may be the best option for you. And the challenge is to define a window of time in which you abstain from buying anything other than the absolute essentials. So some people choose to do this for a whole month. I've even read about people that choose to do this for a year or more. We're not gonna throw that out there today. But what I'm gonna encourage you to do is, at minimum, commit to the next week, from now until we gather again, or perhaps even the rest of this month as we wrap up this series. No non-essential purchases for that time, whatever the time you define as. And remember, we are not doing this to check some sort of box. That's not how we roll around here. The pastor's not standing at the door to ask if you completed the assignment next week. That's not what this is about. We're doing this to practice responding. We want to respond to and place our trust in the good news we've heard about who God really is and who we get to be because of who he is. And it may even be helpful for you to review the good news we've been talking about this whole series. At any time, you can go to the app, you can look at the outlines, download those. You might even want to print those out, and you can place them places where you're going to see it, and it reminds you of what's true about God and about you. The good news that we're talking about this week is that hurry, sickness, clutters our schedules, our homes, and our hearts. But when we trust our good and generous God to richly provide for our needs, we stop hustling to accumulate more in our own power. Jesus invites us to move away from hurry and into simplicity. I think it's kind of like Jesus is inviting us to play a game of Would You Rather. And my prayer for all of us, myself included, is that we would have the courage to take him up on that invitation and then actively choose what we want more. Can we pray together, guys? Father God, thank you that you are a God who richly provides for your kids. Thank you that you're a God who loves us deeply and lavishly and longs to delight in our presence and in providing for us. God, we know that we can trust you, your goodness, your faithfulness. And from that, Lord, I pray that you'd give us the courage to really evaluate, to dig deep and say, what is it that we want most? What are these desires that we're trying to fulfill? Help us to see this week where we're driven to accumulate more, to fulfill something that you're wanting to actually meet, a need that you want to meet in our lives. And I pray that you give us the courage then to actually act on that, to choose what we want more. Father, I pray that you'd make us more aware of your presence in every moment as we seek to practice what it looks like to live the way of Jesus in our everyday lives. Thank you for the opportunity to slow down and evaluate some of that together today. And I look forward to seeing the ways that you bring your presence to our mind, that you continue to speak to us of the good news throughout the week. In your name, amen. Okay, guys, we have one more week of this series. I'm really excited about it. So I'm looking forward to seeing you back next week as we wrap this one up. A couple of reminders before we get out of here. If you want in on the big night out, and we want you there, make sure and register today or tomorrow, because that's our deadline. Tomorrow night at midnight, that form will go down. So if you have any questions about it or you're struggling to get registered, come find me after the gathering. I'll help you get that done. And remember, next Sunday, last weekend, to bring those cans of Pop-Top pasta into the gathering. You can always send them to the office, but if you want those included and you want to bring them with you, do that next week, okay? Guys, thank you so much for being here. Get out there and practice simplicity this week. We'll see you next week. you.